Hello everyone, we are going to discuss on this video is about quantitative research design. We're going to look into what is research design and what is the significance of the research design in writing a research paper. Here in Practical Research 2, we are already know that what we are going to look into is to write a quantitative type of research. So we're going to look back on what's a quantitative research design, since we already discussed some points of the quantitative research design during the first quarter. The objectives for this session is we familiarize ourselves with the definition, purpose, and nature of different research design under the quantitative research. And then the second objective is to identify and select the most appropriate research design applicable for a given research problem. So let's look into the definition of a research design. According to William Hickman, he defined research design as a master plan specifying the methods and procedures for collection and analyzing the needed information. We use the research design in order for us to come up with a better plan on what we are going to do on our research. Since we already have our problem, our hypothesis, our research questions, we already done with the conceptual framework. So we are going to look into how we are going to collect our data. And from this research design, we are able to master it by planning properly on the methods or procedure on how we collect and analyze our data. Another definition of research design is that it is the plan, structure, and strategy of investigation conceived so as to obtain answers to research questions and to control variance. This is according to Kerlinger in 1986. Let us take note that when we use research design, we identify the appropriate method of gathering information. Titignan natin kung ano ba talaga ang mas karapat-dapat na research design ang ating gagawin para sa ating research problem. Let us take note that the research design is ideal to solve the problems that we identify. Let's take note also that all of what we are doing should be anchored to our research problem. Dahil dito, masasagot natin or masosolve natin yung ating problema na gagawin para sa research na ito. Let's look into these research methods. Let's take note that we are focusing on the quantitative research method. You're going to look into the caricature, the comics that we have. For the quantitative method, you can see there's a free ice cream, and according to another person, only 1 in 30 take the free ice cream interesting. So you will notice that there is a significant relationship among variables through the numbers. Pinag-uusapan natin sa research na ito, sa quantitative research, ay numbers. While on the qualitative method, you will see 1 talking about what did you feel when you saw the free ice cream. Then the other person answered excited, a little scared. And the other person asked again, and why was that? So you will notice that the qualitative research method more focuses more on the meaning of responses through verbal or a non-verbal reactions or data. So what we are going to emphasize on the research design that we are going to choose, that we are going to use in our own research is that we are going to look into the numbers. And the quantitative research design comprises of two types. We have the experimental, which is the cause and effect. And we have the non-experimental, which describes and relates variables. So let's look into the different types or kinds of experimental and non-experimental research design. For the non-experimental research design, we have three. We have descriptive research design, we have longitudinal research design, and we have correlational research design. For experimental, we have true experimental design and a quasi-experimental design. Let's have this example for descriptive research. A descriptive research, it is a design used to describe a certain condition or phenomenon in a given sample using quantifiable descriptors. It involves the use of frequency count, percentage, Likert scale, the mean, and standard deviation in answering the research question. So in the descriptive type of research, we use what we call in statistics, the measures of central tendency. The numbers that we are able to get from this statistical data will be under the descriptive type of research. So kung gagamit tayo ng Likert scale, yun ay tinatawag nating descriptive research. Example, a teacher wants to determine the number of her students group according to their sex who are still non-readers. Here, there is a frequency count. Ilan daw yung bilang ng mag-aaral according sa gender, sa sex, lalaki o babae, na hindi pa marunong bumasa. So, bibilangin. There's a frequency count, percentage. So that's an example of a descriptive research design. Another example is that a teacher wants to determine the general academic performance of her students in mathematics. So we have here the mean scores of their academic performance. So we are going to look into on this type of research is a descriptive research design. This is much common type of research design for education. The descriptive type of research. So humanities students and ICT students may use descriptive design more often compared to the STEM students. Another example of a non-experimental research design is the longitudinal research design. It is used to describe a certain condition or phenomenon in a given population using quantifiable descriptors. When we say longitudinal research design, it has a prolonged process of a descriptive research. Medyo mahaba ang ating pinag-uusapang oras. It involves the use of frequency count, percentage, Likert scale, mean, and standard deviation in answering the research questions. As I said, longitudinal, you need a greater amount of time in order for you to analyze, to gather your data. Because when you do the longitudinal research, you are often to come up with experiments or treatments which needed a much longer time for your interventions. The last type of non-experimental research design is the correlational research design. It is a design used to seek significant relationship between identified variables. So here, you are going to look into whether variable A has a significant relationship with variable B, or the independent variable has a significant relationship with the dependent variable. So more on if the one increases, maybe the other one increases, or if one increases, the other one decreases. So we can look into that kind of relationship. Example, a teacher wants to find out if sex can be a predictor of performance in English in his class. So there is a relationship. You are going to find the relationship between sex and performance in English. Sex means the gender, male, female, on the performance in an English class. Then you have another example. A teacher wants to determine if belonging to a broken family has a relationship to students' attitude towards attending classes. So here we are going to look into the relationship between a broken family and attending classes. So if, di ba, may connection daw ba? Kung ang estudyante ba ay galing sa broken family, palagi ba siyang absent o lagi ba siyang uma-attend ng klase? So there is a correlational research that will take place on this kind of situations. Let's move on to the experimental type of research. So the first one is the true experimental. When we say true experimental, there are 3 characteristics that we need to take note. The first one is it should be randomized. Number 2, it should be manipulated. Your independent variable should always be manipulated, and there should be a control variable. Let us take note that in the true experimental type of research, it should always be, or it should always have a randomization, which means that there should be no bias that will take place on our research. And this type of experimental research design is more common on the STEM students. Let's take note that if one of the characteristics is missing, then it will fall now under quasi-experimental. The quasi-experimental is a semi-experimental research design, which lacks the randomization, or that you will not be able to manipulate or the variable, or you don't have a control variable. So we have 2 examples of quasi-experimental. We have pre-experimental and the time series design. Let's look into the symbols before we see the examples for experimental research. So X is the exposure of a group to an experimental treatment. So dito makikita natin yung intervention na ginawa natin on our variable or on a certain group. Then O is for the observation. So after treatment or before treatment, we measure our variables. And then R is for the random assignment of test units. So for our pre-experimental design, we have 3 types. We have one-shot case study. We have one group pre-test, post-test design, and we have static group comparison. All of this have no random assignment. We will not pick samples from the population, but what we are going to do is to get the samples who is available or which is available already. Or the researcher will choose who will participate on a certain experiment. In a one-shot case study, you will have the independent variable as your X. This is where you will have your treatment or your experiment. Then after that, you will observe the outcome. So that's O. So that will be your dependent variable. For the one group pre-test, post-test design, you have an observation first. So you may have, for example, you want to test the performance of a student before you conduct a certain module as your treatment. So you will have a post-test right after your treatment. So you have your observation and then your treatment and then observation afterwards. For the static group comparison, you now have an experimental group and the control group. In the experimental group, you have your treatment, which is X, then you observe what will happen. It's just like you have a one-shot case study, but you have a control group where you did not do anything on that kind of group. That's why it's called a control group. So lahat ng circumstances, ng variables, kailangan parehas doon sa ating control group on this kind of pre-experimental design. So example, one-shot design. A group of students were given a lecture about sentence patterns in English, and then were given some exercises about it. So you have the X, which is the treatment, is the exercises about, we have the lecture on the sentence patterns in English, so that's your treatment. And then the observation now is the exercises given after the lecture has been given. So that's one-shot design. For one group pre-test, post-test design, so example, we have students in homogeneous section, halo-halo. All boys or all girls, homogeneous section, were given a diagnostic test in mathematics. Or all students with grade of 90 in math, they are in one section. That's how homogeneous is. Then they designed a software to improve learning outcomes in this subject. Afterwards, they were given an achievement test to show how technology can be successfully implemented in the school. So you have your observation first. There is a diagnostic test given. So that's the first observation. And then the treatment is the use of a technology software that will improve the learning outcomes of the students. And then the last observation, as the post-test, is a achievement test to show if the program or the software is successfully implemented in the school. Example for static group design. So we have a teacher is handling two groups of non-readers in order to find out the effectiveness of their intervention. She applied it to one group while applying a traditional approach to the other. So they have here the experimental group, which given a certain intervention for reading, and the control group did not receive or did not apply, the teacher did not apply on the control group the intervention given to the experimental group. Then right after that, they were observed for the outcome of the experiment. For true experimental design, so this has random assignments. We have pre-test, post-test, control group design. So the difference of this to the one group pre-test, post-test design is that this has a random assignment. Then we have post-test only control group design, and then the Solomon for group design. So for the random assignment, we still have the pre-test, post-test control group design, or the classical experimental design that we use. So you observe first for experimental and control, and then you do the treatment on the experimental and no treatment on the control group. Then right after the treatment on the experimental, we observe what happens to the experimental and what happens to the control group. So that's pre-test, post-test, control group. For post-test only control group design, there's no observation that will take place prior to the treatment. But we have a control group design. A control group. So we have the treatment and then the observation. while for the control group, we only have the observation. So let's have this example. In the pre-test post-test control group design, researchers want to monitor the effect of a new teaching method upon two groups of children, both with pre-test and post-test. Only the second group has the treatment. Other areas included evaluating the effects of counseling, testing medical treatments, and measuring psychological constructs. The only stipulation is that the subjects must be randomly assigned to groups in a true experimental design. So here we have two observations. For the experimental, we have the pre and the post after the treatment. And in the control group, we have two observations, but without any experimental approach or treatment on that kind of group. And those who belong to the experimental group and the control group has been randomly selected. For the post-test only control group design, let's have this example. A teacher is handling two groups of non-readers. In order to find out the effectiveness of her intervention, she applied it to one group while applying a traditional approach to the other. So here, we have a control group, a random group as well, and we have treatment and post-test after the treatment. In the Solomon 4 group design, so it's a combination of the pre-test, post-test control group design and the post-test control group design. So this is the example of Solomon 4 group design. A researcher would like to find out the effect of reading intervention in the student's English academic grade. All groups undergo randomization. And then, first group, students with intervention, pre-test and post-test. Second group, students with pre-test and post-test only. The third group, students with intervention and post-test only. And the fourth group, students were given post-test only. So you will notice that the Solomon 4 group design, which is known to be the best experimental design, because you have 4 setups with 2 control group and 2 experimental group. So that's the quantitative research design. I hope that you have learned something and that we have able to grasp the knowledge to answer our first question: what is a research design and what's the significance of having research design in writing our research paper? Thank you very much and goodbye.